They called her a traitor before she could speak a single word in her own defense. In one night, Elara Whitcombe's name became poison, a forged letter, a cold accusation. And the man she'd secretly watched from across ballrooms, Duke Alistair Blackthorne, destroyed her without mercy, without question, without a shred of doubt in his icy gray eyes. But here's the truth no one saw coming. The woman he condemned would rise from exile stronger than any of them. And the Duke? He'd spend the rest of his life trying to undo the worst mistake he ever made. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elara's story travels. The candles in the Ashford ballroom burned too bright that night, casting sharp shadows across marble floors and the faces of people who smiled with their mouths but never their eyes. Elara Whitcombe stood near the far wall, a glass of untouched champagne in her gloved hand, watching the room spin in its careful choreography of power and pretense. She'd perfected the art of being present but invisible. Not plain, never plain. Her dark hair caught the light in soft waves, and her gown, a deep emerald silk, fit her frame with understated elegance. But she had no title beyond Miss, no fortune worth mentioning, and no mother alive to push her toward advantageous matches. So she floated at the edges, observing, listening, learning the language of a world that would never fully let her in. And across the room, cutting through the crowd like winter wind through silk, was the Duke of Blackthorne. Alistair Blackthorne didn't walk. He moved with purpose, every step calculated, every glance precise. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black except for the stark white of his collar, he looked like something carved from stone and left out in a storm to weather. His face was all hard angles, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that seemed to have forgotten how to curve upward. And those eyes, gray as London fog, just as cold, just as unreadable. People stepped aside for him without thinking. Conversations paused. Even the music seemed to dip in volume when he passed. Elara had been watching him for months now, not out of infatuation, she wasn't fool enough for that, but out of fascination. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve, a man who wielded power like a surgeon's blade, cutting away anything inefficient, anything emotional, anything human. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. One word from the Duke could ruin a man's career, dissolve a business, end an engagement, logic, control, absolutes. That's all he seemed to understand. She wondered sometimes what it would take to crack that perfect facade. What would make a man like that feel something, anything, beyond cold calculation? She'd never know, of course. Men like Alistair Blackthorne didn't notice women like her. Miss Whitcombe? Elara turned, startled. Lady Catherine Fernsby stood beside her, all blonde ringlets and practiced sweetness, her fan fluttering in a way that was probably meant to look demure, but came off rehearsed. Lady Catherine, Elara said, inclining her head politely. You look positively lost over here, Catherine said, her voice dripping with concern that didn't reach her pale blue eyes. No dance partners tonight? Translation, no prospects, no value, no point in you being here. I'm quite content, Elara replied evenly. The music is lovely from any vantage point. Catherine's smile tightened. How charmingly philosophical. She leaned in, lowering her voice to something conspiratorial. Though I must say, it's rather bold of you to attend tonight, given the whispers. Elara's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. Whispers? Oh, you haven't heard? Catherine's eyes gleamed. There's been talk, something about correspondence, letters that perhaps shouldn't have been written. She paused, letting the words hang. To certain foreign parties. The air in the room suddenly felt thinner. I don't know what you're referring to, Elara said carefully. Of course not. Catherine's fan snapped shut. I'm sure it's nothing, just terrible gossip. You know how people talk. She glided away, leaving Elara's pulse hammering in her ears. Letters? Foreign parties? What in hell was she talking about? Elara scanned the room, and that's when she noticed it, the subtle shift. Eyes cutting toward her, then away. Heads bending together, lips moving behind gloved hands. Something was wrong. She needed to leave, now. But before she could move, the ballroom doors opened with a force that made the chandelier shiver. 6 men in the king's uniform strode in, their expressions grim, their hands resting on sword hilts. The music stopped. Captain Reeves, the king's head of security, stepped forward. His gaze swept the room and landed on Elara like a hammer. Miss Elara Whitcombe. Her name echoed in the sudden silence. Every eye turned to her. You are to come with us immediately. Her mouth went dry. What? Why? Evidence has been brought forward. You are accused of treason against the crown. The word detonated through the room. Gasps. A woman's fan clattered to the floor. Treason. That's absurd, Elara managed, but her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. There's been a mistake. No mistake, Reeves said flatly. He gestured, and 2 guards stepped forward, flanking her. A letter was discovered in your personal effects. Correspondence with French operatives detailing crown movements and classified intelligence. The room spun. I didn't write any letter. I don't know what you're... Enough. The voice cut through the chaos like a blade through cloth. The Duke of Blackthorne stepped forward, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For one wild, desperate second, she thought he might help her, that maybe, somehow, he'd see through this insanity. Your Grace, Captain Reeves said, inclining his head respectfully. We have the matter well in hand. I'm aware. The Duke's gaze didn't leave Elara. I was the one who brought the letter to your attention. The floor dropped out from under her. No. You! The word barely made it past her lips. The letter was found among items stored at the Whitcombe residence, the Duke continued, his tone clinical, detached. Written in your hand, signed with your name. Containing information only accessible to those with connections inside the palace. I didn't write it, Elara said, and she hated how her voice shook. Your Grace, please. I would never... The evidence is irrefutable. His expression didn't change, not even a flicker of doubt. I reviewed it personally. The handwriting analysis was conclusive. She stared at him, this man she'd watched for months, this man she'd thought was at least rational, at least fair. You didn't even ask me, she whispered. Something passed across his face, so brief she almost missed it, but then it was gone, replaced by that stone-cold mask. I don't need to ask, he said quietly. The facts speak for themselves. The facts are lies. Her voice cracked, too loud, too desperate. People were staring. Let them stare. I don't know who wrote that letter, but it wasn't me. I've never communicated with anyone in France. I've never... Miss Whitcombe. The Duke stepped closer, and his voice dropped to something almost gentle. Almost. The king has seen the evidence. The verdict is final. Continuing to deny it will only make this worse for your family. Her family. Her younger brother. Her aging father, whose health was already fragile. The Duke knew exactly where to press. Confess, he said, so softly only she could hear. Accept exile. Your family's name can be partially salvaged. Continue to fight, and they'll be investigated as co-conspirators. She couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I won't confess to something I didn't do. His jaw tightened. Then you're a fool. He stepped back, nodding to Captain Reeves. Take her. The guards moved in. Hands gripped her arms. The champagne glass fell from her hand and shattered against the marble, and somehow that small, sharp sound felt like the most real thing in the room. Your Grace! She tried to pull free, but the guards' grips were iron. Please, just look at the letter again. Really look at it. Someone is framing me. I don't make mistakes, Miss Whitcombe. Those gray eyes, so cold, so certain. I looked at every detail. I verified every source. You are guilty, and I will not allow sentiment or personal considerations to cloud my judgment. Personal considerations? What did that even mean? But there was no time to ask. The guards were dragging her toward the doors. The crowd parted like she carried plague. She saw Catherine Fernsby's satisfied smirk, Lord Ashford's disgusted sneer, Lady Margaret's hand pressed to her mouth in performative shock. And through it all, the Duke stood perfectly still, watching her be dragged away with the same expression he might wear observing a particularly dull chess match. She wanted to scream, to fight, to demand they listen, but she could already feel the weight of what was coming, This wasn't about truth. It never had been. This was about power, and she had none. The holding cell was small, damp, and smelled like rust and old fear. Elara sat on the narrow bench, still in her emerald gown, now wrinkled and stained from the rough cobblestones they'd dragged her across. No trial, no chance to speak, no defense, just exile. The formal decree came at dawn, delivered by a bored clerk who wouldn't meet her eyes. By order of His Majesty and under advisement of the Duke of Blackthorne, Miss Elara Whitcombe is hereby found guilty of treason and sentenced to permanent exile to the northern frontier. All property and titles are forfeit, family name to remain under scrutiny pending further investigation. Permanent exile. The words didn't feel real. She'd never even been north of Yorkshire. They gave her one trunk, to pack whatever she could salvage from her family's estate before it was seized. Her father was too ill to see her off. Her brother James stood in the doorway of their townhouse, pale and shaking, barely 16 and suddenly responsible for keeping their family from complete ruin. "I didn't do it," she told him, gripping his hands. "James, you have to believe me. I know." His voice broke. "I know you didn't, Elara." "Then why won't anyone else listen?" He looked away, jaw working. "Because the Duke said you're guilty, and no one questions the Duke." The unfairness of it hit her like a physical blow. "I'll find a way to clear my name," she said, even though she had no idea how. Don't." James's eyes were glassy with unshed tears. "Don't make promises you can't keep. Just survive. That's all I ask. Just survive." She wanted to argue, to insist she'd fight this, but the look on his face stopped her, so she just hugged him, breathed in the familiar scent of home and safety, and tried to memorize the feeling, because she knew, deep in her bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. The journey north took 3 weeks in a cramped, freezing carriage with bars on the windows and guards who wouldn't speak to her except to shove stale bread through the slot twice a day. She watched London disappear behind her, watched the countryside shift from green and familiar to gray and barren, watched the sky grow heavier, the air colder, the land harsher. By the time they reached the estate, if you could even call it that, she was numb. Not from cold, though there was plenty of that, but from the sheer enormity of what had been taken from her. Thornmoor Estate was a crumbling stone manor at the edge of nowhere. 3 stories of sagging roof lines, broken windows, and ivy so thick it looked like the forest was trying to reclaim the building entirely. The grounds were overgrown. The gate hung off one hinge. "This is it," one of the guards said, unlocking the carriage door. "Your new home." He said it like a joke. Elara stepped out into ankle-deep mud, her thin slippers immediately soaked through, and stared at the wreckage before her. This was what they'd given her. This rotting, forgotten corner of the world. This was where they expected her to disappear. The guards dumped her trunk in the mud and left without another word, their carriage disappearing down the overgrown road until even the sound of wheels faded into silence. And then she was alone. Completely, utterly alone. She stood there for a long time, staring at Thornmoor, at the life she'd been condemned to. Then she picked up her trunk, dragged it through the mud to the front door, and shoved it open with her shoulder. The inside was worse than the outside. Dust, mold, broken furniture, a bird's nest in what used to be the chandelier. Elara set the trunk down, took off her ruined slippers, and walked barefoot across the filthy floor to the one window that still had glass. From here, she could see miles of wild, empty land, hills and forest and sky. No society, no rules, no Duke passing judgment with those cold, unfeeling eyes, just survival. Her reflection stared back at her from the dirty glass, pale, hollow-eyed, still wearing a ball gown like some kind of sick joke. The woman in the reflection looked breakable. She wasn't sure yet if that was true, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. If she survived this, if she clawed her way back from nothing, she would never, ever let anyone make her feel powerless again. Not society, not the king, and especially not Alistair Blackthorne. The first week nearly killed her. Not metaphorically, literally. The estate had no food, no firewood, no water except a half-frozen stream a quarter-mile into the woods. The roof leaked in 4 places. The stove was broken, and winter was coming fast. Elara had never chopped wood in her life, had never started a fire without a servant doing it first, had never gone more than a few hours without a meal. She learned. She had to. Her hands blistered and bled from the axe. She got the fire wrong 6 times before it finally caught, and even then it smoked so badly she had to sleep with the windows open despite the cold. She ate wild berries and roots she wasn't entirely sure were safe, and spent 2 days violently ill as a result. But she didn't die. That felt like victory enough. By the 2nd week, she'd figured out how to patch the roof with oilcloth from her trunk, how to set snares for rabbits, how to boil water without burning herself. By the 3rd week, she stopped crying herself to sleep. The village, if you could call a cluster of 12 cottages a village, was 3 miles south. She walked there on a gray morning, her boots, practical ones now, not slippers, crunching through frost, and found a place that looked like it had been forgotten by time itself. The villagers stared at her like she'd arrived from the moon. "You're the exile," a woman said flatly. She was maybe 40, maybe 60, hard to tell with a face that weathered. "The traitor." Elara lifted her chin. "I'm Elara Whitcombe, and I'm not a traitor." The woman snorted. "Don't matter what you are. Matters what they say you are." "Fair point. I need work," Elara said. "I can teach, read, write, arithmetic. I can... No one here's got money for fancy teaching. Then I'll do it for free." That got their attention. An old man leaning against a fence post squinted at her. "Why?" "Because I'm going to be here a while," Elara said simply. "And I'd rather be useful than useless." The old man considered this. Then he spat into the dirt. "My grandson can't read. Makes him feel stupid." "He's not stupid," Elara said. "He just hasn't learned yet." Something shifted in the old man's expression. "Tuesdays and Thursdays," he said. "1 hour. I'll pay you in eggs." It wasn't much, but it was a start. By the time winter truly hit, Elara had 4 students, then 6, then 9. She taught them in the corner of the village's only tavern, using charcoal on slate boards she'd bartered for with mending work. The children were wary of her at first, this strange woman from the south with her fine accent and her tainted name, but she didn't talk down to them, didn't treat them like they were simple just because they were poor. And slowly, they softened. "Miss Elara?" a girl named Bess asked one afternoon, her brow furrowed over a slate. "Why'd they send you here? What did you really do?" The other children went quiet, watching. Elara set down her own slate. "They said I wrote a letter I didn't write. They said I betrayed people I never would, and they didn't let me prove I was innocent." "That's not fair, Bess said. "No," Elara agreed. "It's not. So what are you going to do about it?" The question hung in the cold air. What was she going to do about it? For weeks now, she'd been surviving. Just surviving. Keeping her head down, learning to chop wood and start fires and live in this harsh, unforgiving place. But Bess's question stirred something that had been dormant. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but something colder, sharper. "I'm going to keep going," Elara said quietly. "I'm going to build a life here that's mine. And if I ever get the chance to prove the truth, I'll take it. But I won't let what they did to me destroy who I am." Bess nodded solemnly, like that made perfect sense. And maybe it did. Miles away, in a study lined with books and maps and the weight of too many responsibilities, Duke Alistair Blackthorne stared at a letter. Not the forged one that had damned Elara Whitcombe. A new one. From an investigator he'd hired quietly, without telling anyone, to review the case one more time, just to be certain, because certainty was what he valued above all else. The investigator's words were careful, professional. "Your Grace, I regret to inform you that inconsistencies have emerged regarding the evidence in the Whitcombe matter. The handwriting analysis, upon further expert review, shows signs of skillful forgery. Additionally, the source who provided the letter has connections to several individuals who would benefit from Miss Whitcombe's removal from society, most notably." The Duke stopped reading. His hands, always steady, trembled. Inconsistencies. Forgery. No. He'd checked everything, verified every detail. He didn't make mistakes. He never made mistakes. But the evidence was there, in black and white, undeniable. He'd condemned an innocent woman. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and for the first time in years, maybe ever, Alistair Blackthorne felt something crack inside the perfect, controlled fortress he'd built around himself. Horror, guilt, and something else he didn't have a name for yet, something that felt dangerously close to panic. The letter sat on Alistair's desk for 3 days before he touched it again. 3 days of staring at those words, forgery, inconsistencies, innocent, and feeling something he'd spent his entire life avoiding, doubt. He'd built his reputation on certainty, on logic so airtight that emotion couldn't slip through the cracks. People feared him because he was never wrong. Because when the Duke of Blackthorne made a judgment, it was final, absolute, carved in stone. Except this time, the stone had cracked. On the 4th day, he summoned the investigator to his study. The man arrived at dawn, hat in hand, looking nervous in the way people always did when facing Alistair directly. "Tell me everything," Alistair said without preamble. "Every detail you left out of the report." The investigator swallowed hard. "Your Grace, the handwriting, it's exceptional work. Whoever forged that letter studied Miss Whitcomb's hand extensively. They replicated her pressure points, her letter formations, even the slight rightward slant she uses. But under magnification, there are micro-hesitations. Places where the forger paused to reference a sample. A genuine writer doesn't pause mid-word, they flow." He pulled out a magnified image, pointing to nearly invisible breaks in the ink. "Here and here. These are copied strokes, not natural ones." Alistair's jaw tightened. He'd reviewed the letter himself. How had he missed this? "Because you wanted her to be guilty," a voice whispered in his head. "Because it was cleaner that way." He shoved the thought aside. Who benefits from her exile? The investigator hesitated. "Say it." "Lady Catherine Fernsby, Your Grace. And her father, Lord Fernsby. Miss Whitcomb's family holds a small but crucial estate bordering Fernsby lands. With the Whitcombes disgraced, the property will be auctioned. Lord Fernsby has already positioned himself to purchase it at a fraction of its value." Land. It always came down to land or money or power. Something so mundane, so predictable. And he'd missed it. "There's more," the investigator continued carefully. "The man who initially brought the letter to your attention, Lord Ashford, has financial ties to the Fernsbys. He's deeply in debt to them." Alistair felt something cold settle in his chest. "So Ashford delivered the letter on their behalf." "It appears so, Your Grace." "A conspiracy. Not an elaborate one, but effective. They'd known exactly which strings to pull, known that if they brought fabricated evidence to him, to the Duke who prided himself on logic and thoroughness, he'd do their dirty work for them. And he had. He'd destroyed an innocent woman's life because he'd been too arrogant to question his own judgment. "Find everything," Alistair said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Bank records, correspondence, meeting logs. I want proof of their involvement so airtight they can't breathe around it." "Yes, Your Grace. And send word north. I want reports on Miss Whitcomb's condition, weekly." The investigator's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your Grace?" Did I stutter? "No, Your Grace. Of course not." After the man left, Alistair stood at his window, staring out at London's grey skyline. Snow was beginning to fall, light flakes that wouldn't stick but made everything look softer than it was. He thought of Elara Whitcombe in that ballroom, her face draining of color as the guards closed in. The way she'd looked at him, not with hatred yet, but with desperate, naive hope that he'd see reason. "You didn't even ask me," she'd whispered. No, he hadn't, because he'd thought he didn't need to. His hands curled into fists against the window frame. He would fix this. He had to. But a small, ugly part of him knew that some things, once broken, couldn't be put back together the same way. Some damage was permanent. Winter hit the northern frontier like a hammer. Elara woke one morning to find ice crystals spreading across the inside of her bedroom window, her breath fogging in the air, despite the fire she'd kept burning all night. The temperature had dropped so far that the water in her wash basin had frozen solid. She wrapped herself in every blanket she owned and made her way downstairs, feeding the stove until it glowed red hot. The cottage, she'd stopped thinking of it as an estate weeks ago, was marginally warmer on the ground floor, but only just. Outside, snow had buried the world. 2 feet of it, maybe more, with drifts piling against the door high enough that she had to shove her full weight against the wood to crack it open. The cold hit her like a slap. She'd thought she understood winter. London got cold, after all. Frost on the ground, frozen Thames, ladies in fur-lined cloaks. This wasn't that. This was brutal, bone-deep cold that made her lungs ache with every breath. Cold that turned her fingers numb in seconds, even through gloves. Cold that didn't care if you were noble or common, guilty or innocent. It would kill you just the same. "Bloody hell," she muttered, then laughed at herself. A month ago, she'd never cursed aloud. Now it felt natural. She needed firewood. Needed to check her snares before the snow buried them completely. Needed to make sure the stream hadn't frozen over entirely, because if it had, she'd have to melt snow for water, and that took forever. Just another day in paradise. She was halfway to the woodshed when she saw the smoke rising from the village direction. Too much smoke. The wrong color. Fire. She started running. The village was small enough that she could sprint the 3 miles in under half an hour, or she could have, if the snow hadn't been waist-deep in places. By the time she reached the outskirts, her lungs burned and her legs screamed, but the smoke was thicker now, acrid and wrong. The tavern was burning, not the whole thing, not yet, but flames licked up one wall, and the villagers were hauling buckets of water in a desperate chain, shouting over each other, slipping in the snow. "Bess!" Elara grabbed the girl's arm. "Where's your father?" "Inside." Bess's face was streaked with tears and soot. "He went back for the ledgers." Elara didn't think, just ran. The heat hit her the moment she crossed the threshold. Smoke thick enough to choke on, flames spreading across the ceiling beams faster than should be possible. "Thomas!" she screamed, a crash from the back room. She covered her mouth with her sleeve and pushed forward, half blind, feeling her way along the wall. She found him pinned under a fallen beam, coughing, eyes streaming. Can't move it." "Yes, you can." Elara wedged herself under the beam, ignored every screaming muscle, and lifted. She'd spent 2 months chopping wood, hauling water, surviving. Her body wasn't the same soft, sheltered thing it had been in London. The beam shifted. Not much, but enough. "Go!" she gasped. Thomas scrambled free, and together they half ran, half fell toward the door. The ceiling groaned behind them, and Elara felt the heat intensify, felt the air itself start to burn. They burst through the door, just as the roof caved in with a roar that shook the ground. Elara collapsed in the snow, coughing so hard she thought her ribs would crack. Someone threw a blanket over her shoulders. Someone else pressed a cup of water into her shaking hands. "You stupid, brave fool," Thomas rasped beside her, also coughing. "Could have died in there." "So could you," she shot back. He laughed, actually laughed, and after a second so did she. The tavern was a loss. They saved the surrounding buildings, but the main structure was gone, reduced to smoking timbers and ash. "Where will we meet now?" Bess asked quietly, staring at the wreckage. "For lessons?" Elara looked at the girl's soot-stained face, at the other children gathered in the snow, and made a decision that would have horrified London society. "My house," she said, "Thornmoor. It's big enough." The old man who'd first hired her, Silas, raised an eyebrow. "That drafty old wreck?" "That drafty old wreck has 4 rooms and a working stove," Elara said. "And it's mine, sort of, so we'll use it." Something shifted in the villagers' expressions, a reassessment. This exile, this traitor they'd been told to shun, she'd just run into a burning building for one of them, and now she was opening her home. "We'll help you fix it up," Thomas said. "Make it proper for the children. And for you," his wife added pointedly, "that roof's still a disaster." Elara felt something crack in her chest, not breaking, opening. "Thank you," she whispered. On. Over the next 3 weeks, Thornmoor transformed. The villagers brought tools, materials, labor. They patched the roof properly, replaced broken windows, reinforced the sagging porch. The women brought fabric scraps to make curtains. The men built benches for the children to sit on. Elara worked alongside them, learning skills she'd never imagined needing. How to hammer nails without smashing her thumb. How to mix mortar. How to weatherproof a door frame. Her hands, once soft and carefully manicured, were now calloused and scarred. Her skin had lost its porcelain pallor, turned ruddy from wind and cold. Her hair, which she used to spend an hour styling each morning, she now tied back in a simple braid that she didn't think about. She was becoming someone else, someone harder, someone who didn't need anyone's permission to exist. The schoolroom, because that's what the main room had become, filled with children each Tuesday and Thursday. Then Monday and Wednesday too. Then Saturday mornings. They learned to read using whatever books Elara had salvaged from her old life. Poetry, philosophy, histories. She taught them mathematics using practical problems, how to calculate fair wages, how to measure land, how to figure interest on debts. "Why are you teaching us this?" one of the older boys asked. "We're just farm kids." "You're people," Elara said firmly, "and people deserve to understand the world they live in. How else will you know if someone's cheating you? How else will you fight for something better?" The boy considered this. Then he bent back over his slate, jaw set with new determination. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. Nothing about it resembled the careful, constrained existence she'd lived in London. But it was real, raw and difficult, and entirely hers. Some nights, sitting by the fire with frost creeping across the windows, she almost felt something like peace. Almost. Because there was still a part of her, small, stubborn, refusing to die, that remembered the ballroom, the accusation, those cold gray eyes passing judgment without question. That part wanted justice. In London, Alistair was waging a different kind of war. The investigation had expanded. What started as examining one forged letter became untangling a web of corruption that reached further than he'd anticipated. Lord Fernsby wasn't just after the Whitcombe estate. He was involved in 3 other cases where families had been conveniently disgraced, their properties seized and sold at auction, always to Fernsby or his associates. It was a pattern, a system, and Alistair had been their unwitting weapon. "You need to bring this to the king," his solicitor advised. With evidence this extensive, "Not yet," Alistair spread the documents across his desk. "It needs to be airtight. One gap, one question, and they'll slip through. Your Grace, the longer this takes, the longer Miss Whitcombe suffers an exile she doesn't deserve. I'm aware." His voice was sharp enough to draw blood, "which is why we do this right." The reports from the north came weekly, as requested. Brief, factual accounts of Elara's activities. Subject has established a school in her residence, teaching approximately 15 children basic literacy and mathematics. Subject assisted in rescue during tavern fire. Sustained minor injuries. Villagers report improved relations. Subject has integrated into local community. No signs of distress or instability. Each report was a knife twisting in his chest. She was surviving. More than surviving, building something. Without resources, without support, without anyone believing in her innocence. She was doing what he'd thought impossible, and she was doing it alone. "Your Grace." Alistair looked up to find his butler in the doorway, expression carefully neutral. "Lady Catherine Fernsby is here to see you." Every muscle in Alistair's body went rigid. "Show her in." Catherine entered with the same practiced grace she always had, all blonde curls and calculated smiles. She'd been trying to catch his attention for years, not so subtle hints about what an advantageous match they'd make, how well their families aligned. He'd never been interested. Now, looking at her, he felt something much darker than disinterest. "Your Grace." She curtsied perfectly. "I hope I'm not intruding. What do you want, Lady Catherine?" If his bluntness surprised her, she didn't show it. "I heard you've been making inquiries about the Whitcombe matter." His expression didn't change. "Where did you hear that?" "London talks, Your Grace. Surely you know that." She settled into a chair without being invited, arranging her skirts. "I wanted to ensure you weren't wasting your time on a lost cause." "Explain." "Elara Whitcombe was guilty. The evidence was clear. Why dig into something already settled?" "Because the evidence was forged. Catherine's smile faltered, just for a second, but he caught it. That's a serious accusation, she said carefully. Yes, it is. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Lady Catherine, where were you the week before the Ashford ball? What does that have to do with anything? Answer the question. Her jaw tightened. I don't appreciate your tone, Your Grace. And I don't appreciate being manipulated. He stood, and she instinctively drew back. You thought I'd be your weapon. Bring me fabricated evidence, watch me destroy your rival, and walk away clean. That's absurd. Is it? He pulled out a ledger, opened it to a marked page. This shows 3 payments from your father to Lord Ashford in the month before Miss Whitcombe's arrest. Large payments, for services rendered. The color drained from Catherine's face. I don't know what you think you found, she said, but her voice shook. But you can't prove... I can prove all of it. Alistair's voice was ice. The forgery, the conspiracy, your father's involvement, and yours. She stood abruptly, hands clenched in her skirts. You're making a mistake. My father has friends. Your father is about to lose everything he stole. He walked to the door, opened it. Get out of my house. You can't do this. Catherine's composure shattered. I'm the daughter of a lord. You can't just... I'm the Duke of Blackthorne, he said quietly, and I can do exactly that. Leave. Now. She fled. Alistair closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. He had the evidence, had the connections, had everything he needed to bring the Fernsbys down and clear Elara's name. But there was still one problem. Even if he cleared her legally, socially, the damage was done. London society had already judged her. They'd watched her fall and enjoyed it. Bringing her back wouldn't erase that. She'd still face whispers, still deal with people who'd never fully believe in her innocence, who'd always wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was truth to the accusations. Unless he did something drastic, something that would make it impossible for anyone to question her character ever again. An idea was forming. Reckless, unprecedented, completely unlike him. But then again, nothing about this situation was like him. The Duke of Blackthorne didn't make mistakes, didn't feel guilt, didn't spend sleepless nights thinking about gray-eyed women he'd wronged, except apparently he did. Spring came late to the north, but it came. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and mud, and the promise of something growing underneath. The streams swelled with runoff. The air, while still cold, carried the faint scent of earth waking up. Elara stood in what used to be an overgrown garden, now cleared and tilled, ready for planting. One of the village women had given her seeds, carrots, turnips, hardy greens that could survive the short growing season. You'll need to rotate your crops, Silas advised, leaning on his walking stick. Don't plant the same thing in the same spot 2 years running. Noted. Elara brushed dirt from her hands. They were permanently stained now, earth ground into the creases of her palms. She'd stopped trying to scrub them clean. You've done well here, Silas said. Better than most would have. I didn't have much choice. There's always a choice. You could have broken, could have given up, could have become bitter and hateful. Elara considered this, patting down the soil over a row of seeds. Maybe I am bitter and hateful. If you are, you hide it better than most. She smiled slightly. I'm very good at hiding things. It was true. She'd learned in London how to wear a mask, how to show people what they expected to see while keeping her real self locked away. The difference was, here, she wasn't sure which version was the mask anymore. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. Riders. Multiple horses, moving fast. Silas straightened. That's the king's colors. Elara's stomach dropped. 3 riders crested the hill, military uniforms crisp despite the mud, the lead rider carrying a sealed letter. No, not again. Please not again. The rider stopped at the garden gate. The lead officer dismounted, his expression unreadable. Miss Elara Whitcombe? Her throat was too tight to speak. She just nodded. He held out the letter. By order of His Majesty, you are summoned to return to London immediately. The world tilted. Why? The word came out strangled. New evidence has come to light regarding your case. Your presence is required. New evidence. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely take the letter. She broke the seal with numb fingers, scanned the formal language. Investigation uncovered. Conspiracy revealed. Your name cleared of all charges. Cleared. Her name was cleared. You're to return with us, the officer continued. We'll give you time to pack your belongings. No. Everyone stared at her. No, the officer repeated. Elara looked at Thornmore, at the garden she'd just planted, at the school she'd built, at Silas and the other villagers who'd gathered, watching with worried faces. She'd survived here, more than survived. She'd built something that mattered, and now they wanted her to just leave, return to London like nothing had happened, face the same people who'd watched her fall and done nothing. I need time to think, she said. The officer's eyebrows rose. Miss Whitcombe, this is a royal summons. It's not optional. I understand, but I'm not leaving today. She met his gaze steadily. Tell whoever sent you that I'll come when I'm ready, not before. Miss Whitcombe, I said no. The officer looked baffled, like he'd never encountered someone refusing a royal pardon before. Maybe he hadn't. We'll wait, he said finally. But not long. 3 days, Miss Whitcombe. Then you come back with us, whether you're ready or not. They left to make camp near the village, and Elara stood alone in her garden, the letter crumpling in her fist. Cleared. Her name was cleared. So why did she feel like she was about to walk into something worse than exile? Because the truth was, London had already taken everything from her once, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to let it try again. Silas found her that evening, still standing in the garden, staring at nothing. You should go, he said without preamble. I know. But you don't want to. Elara laughed, sharp and humorless. I spent months learning not to want anything. Safer that way. That's not living. That's just surviving. Silas lowered himself onto the garden wall with a grunt. And you've done enough surviving. Time to fight back. I wouldn't know where to start. Start by making them see what they did to you. Make them uncomfortable. Make them squirm. His weathered face hardened. They sent you here to disappear. Don't give them that satisfaction. The words settled into her bones. She'd spent 6 months hiding, building a life in the margins, away from the people who'd hurt her. But maybe Silas was right. Maybe the biggest rebellion wasn't disappearing. It was coming back stronger than they'd ever expected. 3 days, she murmured. Use them well. She did. She spent the first day organizing the school's schedule with the mothers who'd started helping teach. She spent the second day planting the rest of her garden, working until her back screamed and her hands bled. She spent the third day saying goodbye to children who cried and clung to her skirts. You're coming back, right? Bess asked, her voice small. Elara crouched down, meeting the girl's eyes. I don't know, but I promise you this. Whatever happens, you keep learning, keep reading, keep asking questions. Don't let anyone tell you you're not good enough. Bess nodded, wiping her nose on her sleeve. You neither. It was the best advice Elara had received in months. On the morning of the 4th day, she dressed in the only gown she had left that resembled her old life. Deep blue wool, simple but well made, altered to fit her new, leaner frame. Her hair, longer now and less tamed, she braided and pinned. Her hands she couldn't hide. The calluses, the scars, the dirt that never quite washed out. She looked like someone caught between two worlds. Maybe that's exactly what she was. The ride south took 2 weeks. The officers were professional, respectful even. But she caught them watching her sometimes, curious, maybe confused about why she wasn't more grateful, more eager. They didn't understand. How could they? They'd never been unmade and had to rebuild themselves from nothing. London appeared on the horizon like a bad dream she'd thought she'd woken from. The closer they got, the tighter her chest felt. The buildings grew taller, the streets more crowded, the air thick with smoke and noise and the particular stench of too many people packed too close together. She'd forgotten how suffocating civilization could be. They brought her to a townhouse she didn't recognize, not her family's old residence, which had been seized. This place was newer, grander, located in a neighborhood that made her former address look modest. Whose house is this? She asked as they stopped at the entrance. It's been arranged for your use, Miss Whitcombe, the lead officer said. until your family's estate situation is resolved. Arranged. By whom? But the officers were already leaving, and a housekeeper was ushering her inside, and everything was moving too fast. The interior was beautiful: polished wood, expensive furniture, fresh flowers in crystal vases, a bedroom upstairs with a four-poster bed and silk curtains, a wardrobe full of dresses in her size. It felt like a trap. "Who paid for this?" Elara demanded. The housekeeper, an older woman with sharp eyes, paused. "I'm not at liberty to say, miss, but you're to rest tonight. Tomorrow, you have an audience with His Majesty." The king. Of course. Elara dismissed the woman and sat on the edge of the too-soft bed, feeling like an imposter in her own life. She didn't sleep, just sat there, watching the city lights through the window, wondering what fresh hell tomorrow would bring. The palace was exactly as she remembered, oppressive in its grandeur, designed to make everyone who entered feel small and insignificant. It worked. Elara was led through marble corridors by silent guards, her worn boots clicking against floors so polished she could see her reflection. Courtiers stared as she passed, whispering behind fans and gloved hands. She lifted her chin and kept walking. The throne room doors opened, and she stepped into a space designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings, massive columns, and at the far end, the king himself, older than she expected, his face lined with the weight of a crown he'd worn for 30 years. And standing beside him, rigid as a statue, was Duke Alistair Blackthorne. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen him since that night, since he'd condemned her with those cold, certain eyes. He looked different. Thinner, maybe? Or maybe it was the way he held himself, still commanding, still powerful, but with something fractured underneath. Their eyes met across the room. She expected anger to hit her, rage, the burning desire to scream at him, to make him feel even a fraction of what he'd put her through. Instead, she felt nothing, just a vast, empty coldness. Somehow, that was worse. "Miss Elara Whitcombe," the king said, his voice carrying authority but also something that might have been embarrassment. "Approach." She walked forward, stopped at the appropriate distance, and curtsied, not deeply, just enough. "Your Majesty, we have summoned you to right a terrible wrong," the king continued. "New evidence has revealed that you were falsely accused. A conspiracy orchestrated by Lord Fernsby and his associates to steal your family's property." He said it like that made it better. Like labeling it a conspiracy somehow erased the 6 months she'd spent in exile. "Lord Fernsby and his daughter, Lady Catherine, have been arrested," the king went on. "Their assets seized. Your family's estate will be restored, along with appropriate compensation for your suffering." Compensation? What was the going rate for destroying someone's life? She wondered if they'd calculated it down to the penny. "Additionally," the king said, and something in his tone made her tense, "the Duke of Blackthorne has requested permission to speak on this matter." Elara's gaze snapped to Alistair. He stepped forward, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. "Miss Whitcombe," he began, and his voice was rougher than she remembered. "I owe you an apology that words cannot adequately convey. I condemned you without sufficient investigation. I allowed my faith in process to override basic human decency. I failed you in every possible way." The throne room was silent. "I've spent the last 4 months investigating the conspiracy against you," he continued. "I've seized the Fernsby's assets, exposed their network of corruption, and ensured they'll face the full extent of justice. But none of that repairs what I destroyed." He paused, and something flickered in those gray eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret so deep it had nowhere else to go. "I'm offering you a choice," he said quietly. "Your family's estate will be fully restored, but if you wish to pursue charges against me for negligence, for wrongful condemnation, I won't fight it. I'll accept whatever consequences you deem appropriate." Elara stared at him. He was giving her power over him, offering himself up for judgment the same way he'd judged her. Part of her wanted to take it, wanted to watch him fall the way she had. But the larger part, the part that had spent 6 months learning who she really was, just felt tired. "I don't want revenge," she heard herself say. "I want the truth acknowledged, publicly, completely. I want every person who watched me fall to know they were wrong." It will be done, the king said quickly. A formal announcement published in every paper. No, Elara's voice cut through the room like a blade. Not a statement, a trial, public, where every piece of evidence is presented, where the Fernsbys face their accusers, where everyone can see exactly what was done and why. The king looked uncomfortable. Miss Whitcombe, that's highly irregular. Your Majesty. Alistair's voice was sharp. She's right. A statement can be dismissed, questioned, forgotten. A trial creates a record. It makes the truth undeniable. The king's jaw tightened. And if we refuse? Then I'll tell every newspaper in London that the crown is protecting conspirators, Elara said, surprised by her own boldness. I'll make enough noise that you'll wish you'd just given me the trial. For a long moment, the king just stared at her. Then, incredibly, he laughed. You've changed, Miss Whitcombe. Yes, she said simply. I have. Very well. You'll have your trial. He waved a hand. The Duke will handle the arrangements. Now leave us, both of you. I have a headache. They were dismissed like troublesome children. Elara walked out of the throne room, her heart pounding, barely processing what had just happened. She'd demanded a public trial, had threatened the king. The old Elara would never have dared. Miss Whitcombe. Alistair's voice stopped her in the corridor. She turned slowly, keeping her expression neutral. He looked like he wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. Thank you, he finally managed, for pushing for the trial. You're right. It's the only way to ensure the truth stands. I didn't do it for you. I know. He took a step closer, and she fought the urge to step back. But I need you to understand something. When I realized what I'd done, what I'd failed to see, it broke something in me. I don't sleep. I can't focus. Every decision I make, I second-guess, wondering what else I've missed, who else I've wronged. Good, a vicious part of her thought. But she didn't say it. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, he continued. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that what you went through mattered, that it changed things, changed me. People don't change, Your Grace. Her voice was flat. They just become more of what they already were. Then I was already someone who could make catastrophic mistakes and not see them until it was too late. His hands curled into fists at his sides. But I'm trying to be better, to do better. For yourself or for your conscience? The question hung between them. I don't know anymore, he admitted. Maybe both. At least he was honest. The trial, Elara said, changing the subject before this conversation went somewhere she wasn't ready for. When? 3 weeks. I'll need your testimony, your cooperation in building the case. You'll have it. And after, he hesitated. What will you do after the trial? She hadn't let herself think that far ahead. I don't know, she said. Go back north, maybe, or somewhere else entirely, somewhere no one knows my name. You could stay, reclaim your place in society. Society watched me burn and did nothing. Her voice hardened. Why would I want to be part of that again? He had no answer. She left him standing in the corridor, looking more lost than any duke had a right to be. The next 3 weeks were a special kind of torture. Alistair's investigators descended on her with questions, documents, timelines. They needed every detail of that night, of the forged letter, of her time in exile. Reliving it was like picking at a wound that hadn't fully healed. And through it all, Alistair was there. Not hovering, but present. Making sure she had everything she needed, that the investigators didn't push too hard, that she was never left to face this alone. It should have been comforting. Instead, it was confusing. Why are you doing this, Ra? She asked him one afternoon when the investigators had finally left, and it was just the two of them in the study of the townhouse that still didn't feel like hers. Doing what? Being kind, attentive, acting like you care. He set down the document he'd been reading. Because I do care. You didn't 6 months ago. I did. His voice was quiet. I just didn't let myself acknowledge it. She stared at him. What's that supposed to mean? It means I noticed you, long before the accusations, at balls, gatherings, events where we were never introduced but you were always there. Watching, thinking. You were the only person in those rooms who looked like they were actually seeing things instead of just performing. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. I noticed you too, she admitted before she could stop herself. But I never thought that I'd notice you back. A bitter smile. I did. And then when the evidence came forward, when your name appeared on that letter, part of me wanted it to be false so badly that I overcorrected. I made myself believe it was real because believing otherwise felt like letting emotion compromise my judgment. So you destroyed me to prove you weren't compromised. Yes, the word was raw, and I've hated myself for it every day since. She didn't know what to do with this information, didn't know how to process the idea that the man who'd condemned her had also, in some twisted way, been running from the fact that he'd cared. That doesn't fix anything, she said. I know. And it doesn't mean I forgive you. I know that too. So why are you telling me? He met her eyes, and the vulnerability there was almost painful to witness. Because you deserve the truth, all of it, even the parts that make me look worse. Before she could respond, the study door burst open. Her brother James stood there, older than she remembered, face pale and drawn. James! She was across the room in seconds, pulling him into a hug. He held her so tight her ribs ached. They told me you were back. I couldn't believe. I thought, I'm here, she whispered. I'm okay. He pulled back, looking at her with red-rimmed eyes. You look different. I am different. The trial, he said urgently. Elara, you don't have to do this. The king already cleared your name. You could just... I need people to see, she interrupted, to understand what happened. Otherwise, there will always be doubt. But they'll question you, make you relive everything. It'll be brutal. I survived exile, James. I can survive a trial. He looked like he wanted to argue, but Alistair spoke first. She won't be alone, the Duke said. I'll make sure of it. James's gaze snapped to him, hardening. You're the reason she was exiled in the first place. Yes. And now you're what, her protector? James's voice dripped contempt. Bit late for that, don't you think? James, Elara said quietly. It's all right. It's not all right. Her brother's composure cracked. Do you know what the last 6 months were like? Watching Father deteriorate, trying to keep our name from being completely destroyed, wondering if you were even alive? The words hit her like physical blows. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. It wasn't your fault. James's anger deflated. It was his. He pointed at Alistair. And I'll never forgive him for it. Alistair didn't defend himself, just took the accusation with that same terrible acceptance. You don't have to, he said quietly. I don't forgive myself either. James left shortly after, still angry, still hurting. Elara stood at the window watching him disappear into the London streets. He's right to hate me, Alistair said behind her. Yes, she agreed. He is. Do you hate me? She considered the question honestly. I don't know, she said finally. I thought I would. Thought I'd come back burning with it. But mostly I just feel tired and angry at everyone, not just you. At the people who forged that letter. At the ones who believed it without question. At the society that was so eager to watch me fall. That's fair. Is it? She turned to face him. Because I also keep wondering, if you hadn't condemned me, if someone else had, would you have investigated? Would you have cared? The question clearly shook him. I want to say yes, he said. But honestly, I don't know. Before this, I saw people as problems to solve, systems to manage. I didn't let myself think about the human cost. And now? Now I can't stop thinking about it. The trial date arrived faster than she expected. The courthouse was packed, standing room only, with crowds spilling into the streets outside. Everyone wanted to witness this. The disgraced woman's return. The Duke's humiliation. The scandal of the season. Elara wore a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back severely. No jewels, no adornments. She wanted them to see her, not a costume. The Fernsbys were brought in chains, Lord Fernsby red-faced and furious, Catherine pale and trembling. When Catherine saw Elara, something ugly twisted her features. "You bitch!" she hissed. "This is all your fault." "Silence!" the judge barked. The trial began. The prosecution, led by Alistair himself, which caused a stir, laid out the evidence methodically. The forged letter, analyzed and proven false. Financial records showing payments to Lord Ashford. Correspondence between the Fernsbys plotting the frame. It was damning, thorough, irrefutable. Then came Elara's testimony. She took the stand, placed her scarred hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecution attorney, one of Alistair's associates, began gently. "Miss Whitcombe, can you describe the night of your arrest?" She did. Every detail. The ballroom, the accusation, the guards. And when His Grace, the Duke of Blackthorne, confirmed your guilt, what did you feel? "Betrayed," she said quietly. "Because I'd thought, foolishly, that justice meant something, that truth mattered." "And your time in exile?" "I learned that survival requires becoming someone you never thought you could be. Harder, colder, less trusting." The courtroom was silent. "Do you blame the Duke for what happened to you?" Every eye turned to her. She looked at Alistair, sitting at the prosecution table, his face carefully blank. "I blame everyone," she said. "The people who framed me, the ones who believed it, the ones who watched and did nothing. And yes, I blame the Duke for not asking one simple question before destroying my life." "What question?" "Is this true?" Her voice cracked slightly. Not, "Does the evidence support this?" but "Is this actually true?" Because if he'd asked me, if he'd given me even one chance to defend myself, we wouldn't be here. Then came the cross-examination. The Fernsby's attorney was a weasel of a man who clearly knew he was defending a losing case, but was being paid enough to try. "Miss Whitcombe, isn't it true that before your exile you had limited prospects? No significant marriage offers?" "Objection!" Alistair was on his feet. "Relevance?" "I'm establishing motive, Your Honor. Miss Whitcombe might have fabricated this entire conspiracy to gain attention." The courtroom erupted. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "That's enough. The conspiracy is proven fact. Try that line of questioning again and I'll hold you in contempt." But the damage was done. The seed of doubt, however small, had been planted. Elara felt it, the shift in the room. Some people would never fully believe her, no matter what evidence was presented. The realization settled over her like ice water. She demanded this trial, thinking it would heal something, that public vindication would somehow make her whole again. But she'd been wrong, because some things, once broken, stayed broken. The trial concluded 3 days later with a guilty verdict for the Fernsbys. Lord Fernsby was sentenced to 20 years, Catherine to 10. Their assets were seized, their titles stripped. Justice, they called it. Elara stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by people congratulating her, telling her how brave she was, how they'd always known she was innocent. Liars, all of them. She pushed through the crowd, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but here. A hand caught her arm. "Alistair." "Let me go," she said. "Elara, don't." She yanked free. "Don't act like we're on the same side now. Don't act like this fixed anything. I know it didn't. You were right that first day. You don't make mistakes. You made a choice. You chose to believe the worst of me because it was easier than questioning your precious logic. And now you're choosing to play savior because it makes you feel better about what you did. That's not, isn't it?" Her voice rose. "You investigated. You exposed the conspiracy. You stood up there and prosecuted the case brilliantly. And everyone's calling you noble for it. The Duke who righted his wrong. How heroic." People were staring now. She didn't care. "But here's what they don't see," she continued, voice shaking. "You didn't do this for me. You did it for yourself, because you couldn't live with being wrong." The words hit him like physical blows. "Maybe that's true, he said quietly. "Maybe I am that selfish. But Elara, I swear to you—" "Don't swear anything." She stepped back. "Just leave me alone." She walked away, ignoring his calls, ignoring everyone. She made it 3 blocks before the tears came. Not sad tears, angry ones, frustrated ones. Because she'd won. She'd gotten her trial, her vindication, her justice. And she still felt empty. She ended up at the townhouse, locked the door, and sat in the dark. Hours passed, maybe days. She wasn't sure. Someone knocked. She ignored it. They knocked again, harder. "Elara!" James's voice. "Open the door! I know you're in there!" She didn't move. "Fine, I'm coming in." The sound of a key turning. James had gotten a spare somehow. He found her sitting on the floor of the study, still in her trial dress. "You look awful," he said. "Thanks." He sat down beside her. "The Duke's been here 4 times. I told him to leave." "Bod's sorry." "Good." "The newspapers are calling you a hero. The woman who survived exile and brought down a conspiracy." "I'm not a hero, just angry." "You're allowed to be angry." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I thought it would feel better. Winning. Maybe winning isn't supposed to feel good. Maybe it's just supposed to feel done." She considered that. "I want to go back north," she said. "To Thornmoor, to the school." "Then go." "But father, the estate?" "I'll handle it," James said firmly. "You've done enough. You've fought enough. If you want to go back north, then go. Build the life you actually want, not the one society expects." The permission she didn't know she needed. "Thank you," she whispered. He hugged her tight. "Go, be free. And if that Duke shows up again, I'll personally throw him out." She almost smiled. But before she could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouting, breaking glass. James was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "What is it?" Elara asked. His face went pale. "Mob. Angry mob." She joined him at the window, and her blood ran cold. Dozens of people, maybe more, surrounding the townhouse. Torches. Weapons. Faces twisted with rage. "Traitor, someone screamed. "She walked free while good people suffer." "The Fernsbys had friends," James said urgently. "People who lost money when their assets were seized, and they're blaming—" The front window exploded inward. A torch sailed through, landing on the carpet. Fire caught immediately. And Elara realized with horrible clarity that vindication meant nothing if you didn't survive to claim it. James grabbed her arm, yanking her away from the window as another torch crashed through, flames spreading across the wooden floor with terrifying speed. "Back door!" he shouted over the roar of the mob outside. But before they could move, the front door splintered under the force of something heavy. A battering ram, maybe, or just sheer numbers. The lock gave way with a crack that sounded like a bone breaking. Men poured in, faces she didn't recognize, eyes wild with the kind of rage that came from desperation and misdirected blame. "There she is!" one of them yelled. "The bitch who ruined Lord Fernsby!" Elara backed toward the study, James positioning himself between her and the mob, but there were too many. They surged forward like a wave. Then the world exploded into chaos. Horses, dozens of them, crashing through the mob with military precision. The king's guard, in full armor, swords drawn, cutting through the crowd with brutal efficiency. And leading them, mounted on a black stallion that looked like it had been bred for war, was Alistair. He didn't look like a duke anymore. He looked like something far more dangerous, a man who'd run out of patience for rules and civility. His sword flashed in the firelight as he drove the mob back, his voice cutting through the screaming. "Anyone who doesn't disperse in the next 30 seconds will be arrested for attempted murder." The mob hesitated. Some ran. Others stood their ground, stupid with rage. Alistair didn't wait. He dismounted in one fluid motion, strode through the broken doorway, and his gaze found Elara immediately. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, too shocked to speak. "James, get her out. Now." He turned to the guards. "Clear this house and arrest anyone who resists." The next few minutes were a blur of smoke and shouting and the clash of steel. The guards hauled struggling men out into the street. The fire was extinguished before it could spread beyond the front room. And through it all, Alistair stood in the center of the wreckage, directing his men with the cold precision of someone who'd done this before. When the house was finally clear, he approached Elara where she sat on the stairs, James hovering protectively beside her. "You need to leave London," Alistair said without preamble. "Tonight." "I was planning to," she managed. "Not to Thornmoor, they know about that. They'll follow you." Her stomach dropped. Then where? My estate, Blackthorne Manor. It's 3 hours north, heavily guarded, and no one would dare attack you there. Absolutely not, James said immediately. She's not going anywhere with you. I'm not asking for your approval. Alistair's voice was steel. I'm telling you that if she stays in London or goes anywhere predictable, she'll be dead within a week. The Fernsbys had more allies than we realized. Rich, powerful people who lost fortunes when their assets were seized. They want revenge, and they've decided she's an easier target than the crown. Elara's hands were shaking. So the trial, all of it, it didn't matter. They still want me dead. No. Alistair crouched in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. The trial mattered. It exposed the truth, but truth doesn't stop desperate people from doing desperate things. And you think hiding me at your estate will? I think keeping you alive long enough for the crown to arrest the rest of the conspirators will. After that, you can go wherever you want, but right now you need protection. And like it or not, I'm the only one who can provide it. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need his protection, his estate, his anything. But the house around her was still smoking. Her brother's face was pale with fear, and she was so tired of fighting. Fine, she said. But the moment it's safe, I'm leaving. Agreed. They left within the hour, a full military escort surrounding the carriage. Elara watched London disappear behind them for the second time in 6 months, and wondered if she'd ever stop running. Blackthorne Manor was nothing like she'd expected. She'd imagined something cold and imposing, all dark stone and harsh angles, matching its owner's reputation. Instead, it was beautiful. Old, yes, and massive, but built with a kind of understated elegance that suggested generations of careful stewardship. Ivy climbed the walls, gardens sprawled in every direction, and when the sun rose the next morning, it lit the whole place in soft gold. Your room is in the East Wing, Alistair said, leading her through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. You'll have privacy. No one will disturb you without permission. Not even you, especially not me. He showed her to a suite that was bigger than her entire cottage at Thornmoor. A 4-poster bed, a writing desk by the window, shelves full of books, a private bathing room with an actual tub. It was too much, all of it. I'll send up some food, Alistair said from the doorway. And clothes, if you need them. Anything you want, just ask. What I want is to understand why you're doing this. He paused, hand on the doorframe. Because I failed to protect you once. I won't make that mistake again. This isn't protection. This is guilt. Can't it be both? She didn't have an answer for that. He left her alone, and she stood in the center of that beautiful room feeling like an intruder in someone else's life. The days blurred together. Elara stayed in her room mostly, reading books she'd never had time for in London, staring out the window at gardens she couldn't bring herself to explore. The estate staff were polite but distant, clearly unsure what to make of her. James visited twice, bringing news from London. More arrests, more conspirators exposed. The king was taking the threat seriously now, deploying the full force of the crown to root out everyone involved. It'll take time, James said, but they'll find them all eventually. How long? Weeks, maybe months. Months, trapped here, in this beautiful cage, waiting for people she'd never met to decide when she was safe enough to have her life back. She wanted to scream. On the 5th day, she finally ventured outside. The gardens were extensive, meticulously maintained, full of flowers she couldn't name. She walked until she found a bench hidden behind a rose trellis and sat down, breathing in air that didn't smell like smoke or fear. You're out! She jumped. Alistair stood a few feet away, dressed simply. No formal coat, just shirt sleeves and vest. He looked more human this way, less Duke, more just. A man. I needed air, she said. May I? He gestured to the bench. She should have said no, should have told him to leave her alone. Instead, she nodded. He sat, keeping a careful distance between them. For a while, neither spoke, just sat there, surrounded by roses and silence. I used to come here as a child, Alistair said eventually, when my father would rage about something, business, politics, the general state of the world. I'd hide here until it was safe to go back inside. Your father was cruel? Not physically, but he had expectations, standards, and I was never quite good enough. A bitter smile. I spent my whole life trying to become someone he'd approve of. Cold, logical, unemotional. It worked. By the time he died, I'd perfected the role. Is that why you condemned me so easily? Because you trained yourself not to feel? He flinched. Yes. And because feeling something for you terrified me more than anything else. Her breath caught. What? I noticed you long before that night, Elara. Watched you at parties, at gatherings. You were different. You actually thought about things instead of just performing. And that scared me, because noticing you meant acknowledging that maybe there was more to life than logic and duty. So when the evidence came, I used it as an excuse to push you away, to prove to myself that I was still in control, still the man my father raised me to be. His voice cracked, and in doing so, I became exactly what I hate most. What's that? A coward. The word hung between them. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know I've said it before. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to understand, I see you now, not as a problem to solve or a mistake to correct, but as a person, a brilliant, strong, infuriating person who survived something that should have destroyed her. Elara's throat was tight. Why are you telling me this? Because you're leaving soon. Back to Thornmoor or wherever else you choose to go. And before you do, I needed you to know that you mattered, that you still matter. She stood abruptly. Don't do this. Do what? Make me believe you've changed. Make me think there's something here worth considering. Her voice shook. Because I can't afford to trust you. Not again. I'm not asking you to trust me. He stood too, facing her. I'm asking you to let me prove I'm worth trusting, however long it takes. And what happens when you decide logic is more important than people again? When the next difficult situation arises and you revert to type? I won't. You can't promise that. You're right. I can't. He took a step closer. But I can promise to try, every day, for as long as you'll let me. She wanted to walk away, should walk away, but something in his eyes stopped her. A vulnerability she'd never seen before. Like he was standing on the edge of something and wasn't sure if he'd fall or fly. I don't know what you want from me, she whispered. Nothing, everything, a chance to be better than I was. Before she could respond, a guard came running through the garden. Your Grace, a rider from London, urgent news. Alistair's expression shuddered back to something professional. Go, I'll be there shortly. After the guard left, he turned back to Elara. I have to. I know. Go. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something more. Then he just nodded and left. Elara stood alone in the garden, surrounded by roses, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The urgent news turned out to be a breakthrough. The Crown's investigators had traced the conspiracy to its source, a secret society of nobles who'd been manipulating court politics for years, using fraud and intimidation to consolidate power and wealth. The Fernsbys had just been one piece of a much larger network, but now, exposed and desperate, the remaining members were planning something drastic. Alistair found Elara in the library that evening and laid out the situation. They're planning to petition the king to overturn the trial verdict, he said, claiming judicial misconduct, that I had a personal interest in your case and couldn't be impartial. Did you? Have a personal interest? Yes. No hesitation. But that doesn't change the evidence. The forgery is proven. The conspiracy is documented. They can't overturn facts. But they can create doubt. Elara set down her book. Make people question whether the trial was legitimate, whether I'm actually innocent or just someone you're protecting, which is exactly what they're counting on. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. The king wants me to step back. Let someone else handle the final prosecutions. Will you? No? Why not? If it would help. Because stepping back means admitting they're right. That I can't be trusted to be objective where you're concerned. His eyes met hers. And they are right. I can't be objective, but that doesn't mean I'll let them win. So what do we do? The fact that she'd said we didn't escape either of them. We go on the offensive, Alistair said. I'm calling a session of Parliament, public, open to the press, and I'm going to present every piece of evidence we have, answer every question they want to ask, and dare them to find one inconsistency. That's risky. Everything about this is risky. He leaned against the desk. But I'm done playing defense, done letting them control the narrative. And if they destroy you in the process, then at least I'll go down fighting for something that matters. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Elara felt something like hope. Not the naive kind, but the hard-earned kind that came from watching someone choose to stand up even when it would be easier to walk away. When? She asked. 3 days. The kings agreed, reluctantly. Every lord and lady in London will be there. It'll be a spectacle. Good. Let them watch. He smiled slightly. You're starting to sound like someone who's ready to fight back. I've been ready. I was just waiting for the right moment. And this is it? This is it. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Alistair worked 20-hour days organizing evidence, preparing testimony, coordinating with allies in Parliament. Elara helped where she could, reviewing documents, pointing out inconsistencies, offering perspective from someone who'd lived through the conspiracy firsthand. They fell into a rhythm, working side by side in the study, debating strategy, challenging each other's assumptions. It felt almost natural. You're good at this, Alistair said one night after she'd identified a crucial gap in the timeline that he'd missed. At what? Seeing patterns, making connections. You'd make an excellent investigator. She laughed. Is that an offer? Would you accept if it was? The question was more serious than his tone suggested. I don't know, she admitted. A month ago, I would have said no, would have gone back to Thornmoor and never looked back. And now I'm realizing that maybe what I want isn't isolation. It's agency, the power to choose my own path instead of having it chosen for me. And what path would you choose? She met his eyes. I'm still figuring that out. The night before the Parliament session, Elara couldn't sleep. She wandered the halls of Blackthorne Manor, restless, anxious, feeling like she was standing on the edge of something significant. She found herself in the portrait gallery, staring at generations of Blackthorne ancestors. All of them looked stern, unapproachable, carved from the same cold stone as Alistair had once seemed. Intimidating, aren't they? She turned. Alistair stood in the doorway, also unable to sleep, apparently. Your family has a type, she said. We do. Cold, distant, married to duty above all else. He walked into the gallery, hands in his pockets. My father used to bring me here and point to each portrait, telling me the great things they'd accomplished, how they'd sacrificed personal happiness for family legacy. Sounds lonely. It was. He stopped beside her. I used to wonder if any of them ever wanted something different, if they ever looked at their lives and thought, is this all there is? Do you think that? Every day since I met you. The confession hung in the air between them. Alistair, I know you don't trust me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to understand something before tomorrow. He turned to face her fully. Whatever happens in that Parliament session, whatever they throw at me, I'm not backing down. Not from the fight. And not from you. From me? I care about you, Elara. I have for longer than I want to admit. And I know that terrifies you because it terrifies me too. But I'm done pretending I don't feel it. Her heart was hammering. What are you saying? I'm saying that when this is over, when you're free to go wherever you want, I'm asking you to consider staying. Not here necessarily, not in London, but somewhere I can prove to you that I'm not the man who condemned you, that I can be someone worth your time. And if I can't give you that, then I'll accept it. But at least I'll know I tried. She stared at him, this man who'd destroyed her life and was now offering to rebuild it on entirely new terms. Every logical part of her said to walk away, to protect herself, to not risk being hurt again. But there was another part, smaller, quieter, but growing stronger, that wondered what would happen if she took the risk. Ask me after tomorrow, she said finally. After Parliament, After we see if your grand gesture actually works. And if it does, then maybe I'll consider it. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and for now, that was enough. The Parliament chamber was packed, every seat filled, every inch of standing room occupied. Lords and ladies in their finest, journalists with notebooks, curious citizens who'd managed to get passes. And at the front, facing them all, stood Alistair. Elara watched from a special gallery, James beside her, both of them tense. "This is insane," James muttered. "One mistake and he's finished." "He won't make a mistake," Elara said, surprised by her own certainty. "How do you know?" "Because he's too stubborn to fail, and too proud to let them win." The session began. Lord Ashcroft, representing the opposing faction, stood to make his opening statement. "Your Majesty, esteemed colleagues, we are here because grave concerns have been raised about the conduct of the Whitcombe trial. Specifically, the Duke of Blackthorne's fitness to prosecute a case in which he had clear personal interest." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "The Duke has admitted to noticing Miss Whitcombe prior to her arrest, to developing feelings for her. How can we trust that his investigation was impartial, that he didn't manufacture evidence to clear her name and redeem himself?" More murmurs, louder now. Alistair let him finish. Then he stood. "Lord Ashcroft raises a fair question," he began, his voice calm and carrying. "Did I have a personal interest in Miss Whitcombe's case? Yes, absolutely, because I was the one who condemned her in the first place." Silence. "I was the one who reviewed the forged letter and declared it genuine. I was the one who stood before the king and recommended exile. I was the one who destroyed an innocent woman's life because I trusted process over people." You could have heard a pin drop. "So yes, I had a personal interest in investigating further because I couldn't live with the possibility that I'd been wrong. And what I found was a conspiracy so extensive, so carefully orchestrated, that it had fooled not just me, but multiple levels of government." He gestured to his assistants, who began distributing documents. "Before you is every piece of evidence we collected. Handwriting analysis from 3 independent experts, financial records showing payments between conspirators, correspondence proving premeditation, and testimony from 27 witnesses." The chamber rustled as people grabbed documents, started reading. "You want to question my impartiality? Fine, question it, but then explain how I fabricated testimony from witnesses I'd never met, how I forged bank records from 3 different institutions, how I convinced independent handwriting experts to lie under oath." Lord Ashcroft was already pale. "The truth is," Alistair continued, his voice hardening, "some of you don't want to accept the evidence because it implicates people you know, people you've done business with, people whose money and influence you've enjoyed." Gasps. This was a direct attack on half the room. "But here's what I'm offering. Challenge any piece of evidence you want. Bring in your own experts. Review every document. Interview every witness. Take as long as you need, because the truth will hold up to scrutiny." He paused, letting that sink in. "And if you find any indication that I manipulated this investigation, I'll resign my title and submit myself to the same justice I sought for the conspirators." The chamber erupted, people shouting, arguing, the king's gavel slamming for order. In the gallery, James turned to Elara. "Did he just stake his entire life on being right?" "Yes." She was gripping the railing so hard her knuckles were white. "Yes, he did." The session went on for hours. Challenge after challenge, question after question. And every single time, Alistair had an answer. Evidence, testimony, proof. By the time the sun set, Lord Ashcroft had gone silent. His allies had stopped trying to poke holes in the case, because there were no holes. The evidence was ironclad. Finally, the king stood. "I've heard enough. The evidence presented by the Duke of Blackthorne is thorough, well-documented, and convincing. The Whitcombe trial verdict stands. This Parliament session is adjourned." It was over. Elara felt her knees go weak. They'd won. Actually won. The gallery cleared slowly. James hugged her, laughing with relief. Other people approached, offering congratulations. Apologies for doubting. She barely heard them. She was searching the crowd for one specific face. She found him outside the chamber, surrounded by people, allies congratulating him, former opponents grudgingly admitting defeat. He looked exhausted, triumphant, and when his eyes found hers across the crowd, something in his expression shifted. He excused himself and made his way over. "You did it," she said. "We did it. No, that was all you, standing up there, risking everything, because you were worth the risk." His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. "You've always been worth it." People were watching, whispering, drawing their own conclusions. Let them, Elara thought. "So," Alistair said, "tomorrow, or whenever you're ready, I believe I was supposed to ask you something." "You were. Are you ready to answer?" She thought about everything they'd been through, the condemnation, the exile, the conspiracy, the trial, the mob, all of it. And she thought about who she'd become through it all, stronger, harder. Someone who didn't need anyone's permission to exist, but also someone who'd learned that strength didn't mean facing everything alone. "Ask me," she said. He took her hand, right there in front of half of London's elite. "Elara Whitcombe, would you consider letting me prove every day for as long as you'll allow that I can be someone worthy of your trust, your time, your affection?" It wasn't a proposal, not quite, but it was close. "I'll consider it," she said, squeezing his hand. "But I have conditions. Name them. I'm going back to Thornmoor to finish what I started with the school." "Agreed. And you're not following me, not immediately. I need time. Space to figure out who I am when I'm not fighting for survival." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "How long?" "I don't know. Weeks, months, however long it takes." "And after?" "After, we'll see." It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was honest. "I'll wait," he said simply. "However long it takes." Later that night, back at Blackthorne Manor, Elara stood in the garden where they'd first had that real conversation. The roses were still blooming, filling the air with fragrance. She heard footsteps behind her but didn't turn. "I meant what I said," Alistair's voice. "About waiting. I know. But I need you to understand something too." He came to stand beside her. "I'm not the same man who condemned you. That person, cold, certain, emotionally detached, he's gone. You killed him when you survived everything he put you through. And who are you now?" Someone still figuring that out. But someone who knows that logic without compassion is just cruelty in disguise. She finally looked at him, really looked, and saw not the Duke who'd destroyed her, but a man who'd dismantled himself piece by piece to become someone better. It didn't erase what he'd done, didn't make the pain disappear. But it was a start. "When I come back from Thornmoor," she said slowly, "if I come back, I'm not coming back as the woman who left London in chains. I'm coming back as myself, whoever that turns out to be. I wouldn't want it any other way. And if that person decides she doesn't want you, then I'll accept it, and I'll still be grateful I got the chance to try." She believed him. That was the thing that surprised her most. After everything, somehow, she believed him. "Good night, Alistair," she said. "Good night, Elara." She walked back toward the manor, feeling lighter than she had in months. Behind her, the Duke of Blackthorne stood alone in his garden, watching her go. And for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to hope for something he couldn't control. The next morning, Elara prepared to leave for Thornmoor. The household staff had packed her things. Not many, she'd insisted on traveling light. James would stay in London, managing their family's restored estate, and Alistair. Alistair stood in the entrance hall, watching her prepare to go with an expression that was carefully neutral, but couldn't quite hide the grief underneath. "The carriage is ready whenever you are," he said. "Thank you for everything." "Elara," he stopped himself. "No, I said I'd wait. I meant it." She smiled slightly. "I know you did." She started toward the door, then paused, turned back, and before she could talk herself out of it, she crossed the distance between them and kissed his cheek. "That's not forgiveness," she said quietly, "but it's acknowledgement of who you're trying to be." His hand came up, almost touching her face, then dropped. That's more than I deserve. Probably. But I've learned that life isn't about what we deserve. It's about what we choose. And what are you choosing? To give myself time, to build something that's mine, and then, she took a breath. Then we'll see. She left him standing there, walked out into the morning sun, and climbed into the carriage. As they pulled away, she looked back once. He was still in the doorway watching, not chasing, not demanding, not trying to control, just waiting, like he'd promised. And Elara thought maybe, just maybe, when she came back, she'd be ready to see where that promise led. But first, she had a school to run and a life to reclaim, on her own terms. Finally, the journey north felt different this time. Last time, she'd been dragged in chains, broken and desperate. Now she sat in a comfortable carriage, free, vindicated, with enough money restored to her family's name that she'd never have to worry about survival again. But the weight in her chest hadn't lifted, because freedom, she was learning, wasn't the same as peace. Thornmoor appeared on the horizon 3 days later, and Elara felt something in her chest unclench. The crumbling manor looked exactly the same, ivy still climbing the walls, roof still slightly crooked, garden now overgrown again after months of neglect. Home. When had she started thinking of it that way? The carriage stopped, and before the driver could open the door, it flew open from the outside. Bess stood there, older somehow despite it only being a few months, her face splitting into a grin. "Miss Elara, you came back!" Elara barely made it out of the carriage before she was swarmed by children. All of them, the entire school, talking over each other, asking questions, pulling at her hands. "We thought you'd stay in London. Did you really face down the king? Thomas said you made a whole parliament session admit they were wrong. Is it true the Duke fought a mob for you?" That last one made her pause. "How did you hear about that?" "Newspapers," Silas said, appearing from the cottage with a newspaper in hand. "You're famous now. The woman who survived exile and brought down a conspiracy. They're writing stories about you." He handed her the paper. Sure enough, there was her name, splashed across the front page alongside a drawing that looked nothing like her, but was clearly meant to be. "Miss Elara Whitcombe, the exiled woman who exposed corruption at the highest levels of government," she read aloud. "Her courage and determination serve as an example to all who face injustice." She almost laughed. Courage. They were calling it courage now. When it happened, they'd called it treason. "So you're staying?" Bess asked hopefully. Elara looked at the cottage, at the children, at the village in the distance where she'd learned what it meant to truly work for something. "I'm staying," she said. "For now, anyway." The children cheered. Over the next few weeks, Elara threw herself into rebuilding. The school expanded, more students now that word had spread, including some from neighboring villages who walked miles to attend. She hired 2 other teachers, young women from the area who'd never had the chance for education themselves, but were sharp and eager to learn. The cottage was renovated properly this time, with funds from her restored estate. New roof, fixed windows, reinforced walls. But she kept it simple. No excess. No unnecessary grandeur. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The village accepted her fully now, not as the exiled traitor or the vindicated noblewoman, but as Miss Elara, the teacher who'd stayed when she didn't have to, who'd built something real instead of running back to comfort. It should have been enough. Most days it was. But some nights, sitting by the fire after the children had gone home, she'd catch herself wondering what Alistair was doing. If he'd kept his promise to wait. If he was still in London, still fighting battles she couldn't see. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she didn't care. She was lying. The letter arrived on a cold morning in late autumn, delivered by a rider wearing the Duke's colors. Elara's hands shook slightly as she opened it. "Elara, I hope this letter finds you well. I've kept my promise not to follow, not to intrude, but I thought you should know. The final conspirators have been arrested. The network is dismantled. You're safe now. Truly safe. I've also taken steps to ensure your school receives permanent funding from the Crown. Education is a right, not a privilege, and what you're building matters more than most of what happens in London. I won't ask when you're coming back, or if you're coming back. That's your choice, and I respect it. But I wanted you to know. I'm still here, still waiting, still trying to be someone worthy of your time. Yours, Alistair." She read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and set it on the mantel. Bess, who'd been helping organize slates, watched her curiously. "Who's it from?" "An old acquaintance." "The Duke?" Elara looked at her sharply. "How did you—" "Everyone knows, Miss Elara. The newspapers talk about him visiting you at the trial, fighting off that mob, defending you in Parliament." Bess tilted her head. "Do you love him?" The question was so direct it caught Elara off guard. "I don't know," she said honestly. "It's complicated." "Why?" "Because he hurt me. Badly. And even though he's trying to make it right, I'm not sure I can forget that." "My Da says forgetting and forgiving are different things," Bess offered. "You don't gotta forget, but maybe you can forgive anyway." Out of the mouths of children. "When did you get so wise?" Elara asked. Bess grinned. "You taught me. Said we should think about things instead of just feeling them. I'm going to regret teaching you critical thinking, aren't I?" "Probably." That night, Elara sat down and wrote a response. "Alistair, thank you for the funding. The children will benefit greatly. I'm glad the conspiracy has ended. Glad I can finally stop looking over my shoulder. You ask if I'm coming back. The truth is, I don't know. This place has become more home than London ever was. The work here matters in ways that society balls and political maneuvering never did. But I also know that hiding here forever would be its own kind of cowardice. Give me until spring, then we'll talk. Elara. She sent it before she could second-guess herself. Winter came hard and fast, burying Thornmoor in snow deeper than the previous year. But this time, Elara was prepared. The cottage was warm, the stores were full, and the school continued even through the worst weather. Children trudging through drifts to learn mathematics and literature and history. She taught them more than academics. She taught them to question authority, to demand evidence, to never let anyone make them feel small. She taught them everything she'd learned the hard way. Christmas arrived, and the village threw a celebration in the cottage. Simple, warm, full of laughter and terrible singing and food that tasted better because everyone had contributed something. Elara stood in the corner, watching children play and adults talk, and felt something she hadn't felt in over a year. Contentment. Not happiness, exactly. That felt too simple, too uncomplicated. But contentment. The sense that this, right here, was enough. Then the door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and snow, and Alistair walked in. The room went silent. He looked different. Thinner, maybe, or just more worn. His formal London attire replaced with practical traveling clothes. Snow dusting his hair and shoulders. His eyes found hers across the room. "I know I said I'd wait until spring," he said, slightly breathless. "But I needed to see you, to make sure you were all right." Elara set down her cup. "You rode through a snowstorm to check on me?" "Yes." "That's idiotic." "Probably." A slight smile. "But I've been accused of worse." The villagers were staring, clearly recognizing him from the newspapers, from the stories. The Duke of Blackthorne, here, in their small cottage, covered in snow and looking completely out of place. Silas broke the silence. "Well, don't just stand there freezing. Come in. Close the door before you let all the warm out." It broke the tension. People went back to their conversations, though Elara caught them stealing glances. Alistair made his way over, stopping a careful distance away. "You've expanded the school," he observed. "We needed more space." "It's impressive. It's necessary." She crossed her arms. "What are you really doing here, Alistair?" He glanced around at the crowded room. "Is there somewhere we can talk, privately?" She led him outside to the garden that was now buried under a foot of snow. The cold bit through her shawl, but she barely noticed. "You said spring," she said once they were alone. "I know, and I would have waited, but something happened." He pulled a letter from his coat. "The king is hosting a New Year's gala to celebrate the end of the conspiracy, the restoration of justice, all of it. And he's specifically requested your presence." "Absolutely not. Elara, I'm not going back there. Not to be paraded around like some kind of symbol, some story they can tell themselves to feel better about, almost destroying an innocent woman. That's not what this is. Then what is it?" He took a breath. "It's a chance to reshape the narrative, to show them that you're not a victim, that you're someone who survived and built something meaningful, who turned exile into purpose." I don't owe them anything. No, you don't. But you could inspire something, change something. His voice softened. The king is proposing educational reforms. Schools in rural areas funded by the crown, modeled after what you've built here. But he needs you there to advocate for it, to show Parliament why it matters. That made her pause. Educational reforms? Yes. Free schools, teacher training programs, resources for communities that have been ignored. He stepped closer. You could help thousands of children get what these children have. But not from here. You'd need to be in London, fighting for it. It was a trap, a beautiful, meaningful trap. Because he was right. She could do more from London than she ever could from Thornmoor. But it would also mean going back, facing the society that had condemned her, risking everything she'd built here. I need to think about it, she said. The gala is in 2 weeks. I said I need to think. He nodded, accepting it. I'm staying at the inn in the village. If you decide to come, or even if you just want to talk, I'll be there. He started to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I think you're exactly the kind of person who should be shaping policy. Someone who understands what it's like to be powerless, who fights for people instead of positions. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the snow. Elara stood alone in her garden, feeling the weight of the decision settling over her. Stay safe. Stay hidden. Keep building this small, meaningful life. Or risk it all to fight for something bigger. The next morning, she called a meeting with her students and their families. I've been offered an opportunity, she told them, to go to London and advocate for educational reforms that could create schools like this one across the country. That's wonderful, one of the mothers said, but it would mean leaving, potentially for months. The room went quiet. We'd manage, Thomas said gruffly. We did before you came. Barely, his wife corrected. Then to Elara. But he's right. We'd figure it out. This is bigger than just us. Bess raised her hand. Will you come back? I don't know, Elara admitted. I'd want to, but I can't promise. Then we'll just have to make sure the school's so good you'll want to come back, Bess said firmly. The vote was unanimous. She should go. That night, Elara walked to the village inn and found Alistair in the common room, staring into a fire. He looked up when she entered, hope and fear warring in his expression. I'll go to the gala, she said. But not for you, and not for the king, for the children who deserve the chance I'm giving mine. Relief flooded his face. That's all I ask. And there are conditions. Name them. I'm not going as your guest. I'm going as an independent advocate. We travel separately. We're seen separately. I won't have people thinking I'm there because of some romantic attachment. Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, but he nodded. Agreed. And after the gala, after the reforms are proposed, I'm coming back here. This is my home now. Understood. Then we have an agreement. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Elara? She paused. Thank you for giving me the chance to watch you change the world. She didn't respond, just walked out into the night, feeling the weight of what she'd just agreed to settle over her shoulders. The journey to London took a week. Elara traveled in her own carriage, as insisted, with a small escort. Alistair had left 2 days earlier, giving her space. The closer they got to the city, the tighter her chest became. But this time she wasn't arriving as an exile or a victim. She was arriving as someone with purpose, with power. The difference mattered. The townhouse the crown had provided was waiting for her, cleaned, staffed, ready. James met her there, sweeping her into a hug that lifted her off her feet. You came back, he said. Temporarily. Still counts. He pulled back, studying her face. You look different, stronger. I am stronger. The gala was in 3 days. 3 days to prepare, to meet with the king's advisors, to outline what she wanted the reforms to include. She worked tirelessly, drafting proposals, citing examples from Thornmoor, building a case so thorough it couldn't be dismissed. And through it all, she barely saw Alistair. He kept his distance, as promised, though she caught glimpses of him at meetings, his presence always a steadying force, even when they didn't speak. The night of the gala arrived. Elara dressed carefully, not in something fashionable, but in something that represented who she'd become. A deep green gown, simple but elegant, with no excessive adornments. Her hair pulled back in a practical style. Her only jewelry a simple pendant James had given her. She looked like herself. Not a society lady, not an exile. Just Elara. The ballroom was exactly as she remembered. Too bright, too loud, too full of people performing instead of being real. But this time she wasn't invisible. People parted for her, whispered, stared, some with admiration, some with curiosity, some with lingering doubt. She didn't care. The king greeted her personally, which caused a stir. "Miss Whitcombe, I'm pleased you could join us." "Your Majesty." She curtsied just enough. "I'm here to discuss the educational reforms." He smiled slightly. "Direct. I appreciate that. We'll speak after the opening remarks." Those remarks came an hour later. The king stood at the front of the ballroom, commanding attention without effort. "Tonight, we celebrate justice," he began. "The exposure of corruption, the restoration of an innocent woman's name, and the promise of a better future." He gestured to Elara. "Miss Whitcombe's story is a reminder that our systems, while strong, are not infallible. That we must always question, always verify, always put humanity before process." Applause, polite, measured. But Miss Whitcombe didn't just survive injustice, she transformed it. In exile, she built a school, educated children who had no access to learning, created opportunity where there was none. The applause grew warmer. And now, she's here to help us replicate that success across the country, to ensure that every child, regardless of birth or wealth, has access to education. He looked directly at her. "Miss Whitcombe, would you like to say a few words?" It wasn't planned, wasn't expected, but she found herself walking to the front anyway, standing where, a year ago, she'd been condemned. She looked out at the crowd, at faces she recognized. Some had watched her fall and done nothing. Some had helped bury her. And some, like Alistair, standing near the back, watching with something that looked like pride, had helped her rise. "A year ago," she began, her voice carrying, "I stood in a room like this and was declared a traitor. I lost everything. My name, my home, my future." The room was silent. "I was sent to a place designed to break me, to make me disappear. And for a while I thought it would." She took a breath. "But then I realized something. The people who condemned me saw me as weak, as someone who couldn't survive without society's approval, without comfort, without validation. They were wrong. I survived. I built. I taught. I became someone I never could have been in London's society, someone useful, someone real." She scanned the crowd. "Now I'm back. Not because I need London, but because London needs people who understand what it's like to lose everything and still stand up." The educational reforms the king mentioned aren't charity, they're necessity. Because right now, thousands of children are being told they don't matter, that their potential doesn't count because they were born poor. I was told I didn't matter, that my truth didn't count. I'm still here, still fighting, and those children deserve the same chance. The applause started slowly, then built into something thunderous. Not polite society clapping, real appreciation. She stepped back, feeling something in her chest unclench. She'd done it, spoken her truth, used her platform for something that mattered. After the speeches, the king pulled her aside along with several ministers. They discussed funding, implementation, teacher training. It was tedious and political and exactly the kind of work she'd never imagined doing. But it mattered. Hours later, when the meetings finally ended and the crowd had thinned, Elara found herself alone on a balcony, breathing in cold night air. "You were magnificent." Alistair's voice. She didn't turn. "I just told the truth." That's what made it magnificent. He came to stand beside her, careful to maintain distance. "You've changed everything, you know. The way people think about exile, about justice, about what it means to survive. I didn't set out to change anything. I just wanted to live. And in doing so, you showed everyone else how." They stood in silence for a moment. "The reforms will pass," Alistair said. "The king is fully committed. Parliament can't oppose him without looking heartless. Good. Which means your work here is done. You can go back to Thornmoor. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt conflicted. What if I don't want to go back? She heard herself say. He looked at her sharply. What? What if I want to stay? Not permanently, but long enough to see the reforms through, to make sure they actually happen instead of just being promises. You'd do that? Someone has to. And I understand both sides now, the policy side and the practical side. She turned to face him. But I'd need help. Someone who knows how Parliament works, how to navigate political waters. I could help. I know. That's why I'm asking. Hope flickered in his eyes. Are you saying, I'm saying we could work together, as partners, equals. She held his gaze. Not romantic, not yet, maybe not ever, but partners in something that matters. I'll take it, he said immediately. Whatever you're willing to give, I'll take it. Even if it's just professional respect, even then. She believed him. That was the thing that had changed. She believed him now. Then let's change something, she said. Together. Over the next 6 months, they did exactly that. Elara became the public face of the reform, speaking at gatherings, meeting with community leaders, sharing her story. Alistair worked behind the scenes, securing funding, drafting legislation, convincing reluctant politicians. They made a formidable team. Slowly, carefully, something else developed too. Not romance, not at first, but friendship. Real friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They had dinner once a week to discuss strategy, started taking walks through London parks, debating philosophy and politics, found themselves laughing at inside jokes about particularly stubborn members of Parliament. One evening, walking through those same streets where she'd once been dragged to exile, Elara realized she was happy, not content, not just surviving, actually happy. What are you smiling about? Alistair asked. Nothing. Everything. She looked at him. A year ago, I hated you, wanted nothing more than to watch you suffer the way I'd suffered. And now? Now I'm glad you're here. He stopped walking. Elara, I'm not ready, she interrupted, for anything more than this. But I wanted you to know I'm not ruling it out anymore. His expression softened. That's more than I ever hoped for. Don't get too excited. I'm difficult, stubborn, and I hold grudges. I'm aware. And I'll probably never fully trust you not to choose logic over people when it matters. I know. So if you're expecting some fairy tale ending where everything's perfect, I'm not. He stepped closer. I'm expecting a real ending, messy and complicated and probably full of arguments, but real. She smiled. Good, because that's all I can offer. Then it's more than enough. The educational reforms passed Parliament in late spring. 50 new schools funded across rural England. Teacher training programs established. Resources allocated for communities that had been ignored for generations. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was real, and it would help thousands of children get chances they never would have had. Elara stood in Parliament the day the vote was finalized, watching history happen, and felt tears prick her eyes. You did this, Alistair said beside her. We did this. No, you did. I just helped clear the path. Maybe he was right. Maybe she'd done this. The woman who'd been exiled, broken, dismissed. The woman who'd refused to stay broken. That summer, Elara returned to Thornmoor, not to stay, but to visit, to see how her original school was doing, to help train new teachers who'd be implementing the reforms elsewhere. The village threw a celebration that lasted 3 days. On the final night, sitting in her cottage with the fire burning low, Bess asked the question she'd been avoiding. Are you coming back? For good? I don't know, Elara admitted. I love it here. It'll always be home, but I love the work in London too, the feeling of changing things on a bigger scale. You can do both, Bess said simply. Spend time in both places. You don't gotta choose. When did you get so wise? You keep asking me that. I keep telling you. You taught me. Elara laughed. I'm definitely going to regret that. She returned to London in autumn, and this time she didn't feel conflicted about it. This was her life now, split between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, but finding purpose in both. One evening, a year and a half after the exile that had almost destroyed her, Elara stood in Alistair's study, reviewing proposals for expanding the reforms to include secondary education. "This section needs work," she said, marking the document. "The language is too vague. Parliament will tear it apart." "Noted." He made the correction. "Anything else?" "Yes. You need to stop hovering when I'm working. It's distracting." "I'm not hovering." "You're absolutely hovering." He smiled slightly, moving to sit across from her instead. "Better?" "Marginally." They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Alistair set down his pen. "Can I ask you something?" "You just did." "Elara." She looked up. "What?" "Do you ever regret it, coming back to London? You could have stayed in Thornmoor, built your life there without all this political nonsense." "Every day," she said honestly, "but I'd regret not trying more." "Even though it's harder?" "Especially because it's harder. Easy doesn't change anything." He studied her face. "I love you." The words hung in the air between them. She didn't panic, didn't run, just considered them honestly. "I know," she said finally. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now." She set down her pen. "I care about you, Alistair, deeply. But love is complicated. After everything that happened, after what you did, I understand. Let me finish." She took a breath. "Love is complicated, but so is life. And I've learned that waiting for perfect circumstances is just another way of hiding." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know if I love you, not yet, but I want to find out." She stood, walked around the desk to where he sat. "I want to see where this goes, slowly, carefully, with no guarantees." "I'll take it," he said, standing to face her. "You keep saying that, because I mean it. Whatever you're willing to give, however long it takes, I'll be here." She believed him. Finally, fully, she believed him. "Then let's see what happens," she said. He reached for her hand. She let him take it, and standing there in a study full of proposals that would change thousands of lives, two people who'd been broken and rebuilt began writing their own ending. Not perfect, not simple, but theirs. 2 years after her exile, Elara Whitcombe stood before Parliament once more, this time not as a victim, but as an appointed advisor to the Crown on educational policy. The woman who'd been condemned was now shaping the future. The woman who'd been called weak had proven stronger than anyone expected. And the man who'd destroyed her had spent every day since trying to build her up instead. They weren't married. Might never be. That wasn't the point. The point was that power had been rewritten, not through violence or revenge, but through persistence and purpose. The point was that she'd survived, had thrived, had turned exile into opportunity and injustice into reform. The point was that she'd won, not by becoming what London society expected, but by refusing to let them define her. That evening, walking through the streets of London with Alistair beside her, Elara thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago. Terrified. Alone. Watching her world end. That woman would barely recognize her now. "What are you thinking about?" Alistair asked. "How far we've come." "We?" "I meant me. But yes, we too." He smiled. "High praise from you. Don't let it go to your head." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached her townhouse. At the door, she turned to face him. "Thank you," she said, "for waiting, for changing, for proving that people can be better than their worst moments." "Thank you," he replied, "for giving me the chance." She kissed him then, not tentatively, not like she was testing something, but with certainty, because she'd learned that certainty wasn't about knowing the future. It was about choosing the present, and in that moment, she chose him. Chose this. Chose a future that was uncertain and complicated and entirely theirs to write. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Alistair rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said again. This time she smiled. I know, and I think maybe I might love you too. Might? Fine, definitely. I definitely love you. Happy? Ecstatic. Don't gloat. It's unbecoming. But he was grinning, and so was she, and somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing in the new hour. The woman who'd been cast out had returned, not to reclaim her old life, but to build an entirely new one, on her terms, with her rules, powered by her strength. And if the Duke of Blackthorne happened to be part of that future, if his unwavering devotion and hard-won redemption had earned him a place beside her, well, that was her choice too. And choices, she'd learned, were the most powerful thing anyone could own.